Okay, hello Cloud Gurus and welcome to this lecture. This lecture is on CloudWatch and it's going to be a combination of a lab and some theory. Okay, so if we go over to the AWS console, you'll see CloudWatch sits under our management tools. And it's really important not to confuse CloudWatch with either CloudFormation or CloudTrail. And often actually in the exam, you'll be given different scenarios and you'll be asking, they'll ask you which service to choose. Now we will cover CloudFormation later on in the course. It's one of the most powerful parts of the AWS platform. CloudTrail is basically tracks user activity and API usage, and it's used for basically auditing purposes. So every time you make an API call, every time you do something within AWS, if CloudTrail is turned on, it will log that. What CloudTrail is not used for is performance monitoring. It won't monitor the performance of your EC2 instance. It won't monitor things like CPU utilization, etc. That's what CloudWatch is for. So it's really important not to confuse those two things. Now I just want to go over here and go to EC2. And if you remember when we go to launch an EC2 instance, one of the first things it gives us an option for in this section up here is whether or not we have monitoring enabled. And this is detailed monitoring. So by default, all EC2 instances will have basic monitoring enabled. And basic monitoring basically polls your EC2 instance every 5 minutes. If you want detailed monitoring, it will poll your EC2 instance every 1 minute, but it's costs you extra money and it's not included within the free tier account. So if we go across to here, and this is the Amazon CloudWatch pricing, so you can see what is covered for CloudWatch using free tier. And basically it gives you up to 3 dashboards. You get basic monitoring, and it says here at 5-minute frequencies. And then you get new and existing customers also receive 10 metrics, and you also get 5 gigs of data ingestion and 5 gigs of archive storage per month. If you scroll down, you'll see here that detailed monitoring for Amazon EC2 instances is $3.50 per instance per month, and that gives you detailed monitoring at 1-minute frequencies. So for the purposes of this course, we're just going to use basic monitoring, and essentially we're just polling our EC2 instances and those sorts of things every 5 minutes. So let's go back to the AWS console and we'll go into CloudWatch. Okay, so off to the left, you'll see a bunch of different things. We've got dashboards, we've got alarms, we've got events, we've got logs, and we've got metrics. If I click on metrics, this will actually show me how many metrics are available to me in this particular region. So I've got EC2 metrics available, there's 12. I've got 20 EBS metrics that are available to me. Elastic Load Balancer metrics, I've got 40 available to me. And currently I have 3 S3 metrics available to me. So what can we do with metrics? Well, we can, and you can see down here, add them to a dashboard. So I'm going to come back here and I'm going to create a dashboard. So right now I don't have any CloudWatch dashboards created, so I'm going to call this my overview. That's my dashboard name. Okay, so I've created my overview dashboard, and now the next thing it's going to ask me is to add some widgets. So I can add either metric widgets or text widgets, and I'm just going to add metric graph widgets because I want this to be a very visual dashboard. So the thing I'd like to know about my environment is I want to know about my EC2 instance. So if I want to know certain things about my EC2 instance, this is where I'd add it. So let's say I'm interested in my CPU utilization. And here I can see a history of my CPU utilization. I can see a spike. I must have been doing something at the time, and then the rest of the time it's been below basically 2.5%. So I'm going to go ahead and create that as a widget. Before I do though, you will notice that basically these metrics are on a hypervisor level. So you can only see things such as CPU, disk, network, and then the status. Notice that memory is missing, and we cover exactly why that is in the SysOps course. Now, sometimes this potentially could come up in an exam scenario question where they're talking about what metrics are available. Just remember CPU, disk, network in, and then status. So I'm going to go ahead and create a CPU utilization metric. So here we go, I've got a CPU utilization widget, and we can see my CPU utilization over the last 3 hours. I can actually go and change that for the last day, and it will then update my dashboard appropriately. I'm going to go back and change that to the last 3 hours just to for some consistency. I can then add additional widgets. Again, it doesn't have to just be EC2. I could add in a widget of S3, and it could say I want to know the number of objects within all storage types, or I could want to know the bucket size in bytes, or the bucket size in bytes for both RRS or standard storage. So I'm going to say I want to know the bucket size in bytes. I'm going to go ahead and hit Create Widget. And you can add as many widgets as you want to your dashboard. Basically, this is exactly what it says on the tin. It's a dashboard showing you what you want to see about your AWS environment. It's not restricted to EC2 in particular. You can add things from S3, DynamoDB, whatever sort of service you're using. Now, I don't have a lot of metrics available to me at this stage because it's a brand new account and I haven't created things like RDS instances or DynamoDB instances yet myself. Okay, so let's move on to a couple of other things, and I'm just going to actually jump down to events first. So CloudWatch Events helps you basically react to changes in the state of your AWS environment, and they give a really good example here. So automatically invoke an AWS Lambda function to update DNS entries when an event notifies you that an EC2 instance has entered the running state. So essentially, you can create an event here so that when an EC2 instance has been provisioned, Lambda will automatically go in and update the DNS entries for that event. So that's what CloudWatch Events does. If we go across to here and go over to logs, CloudWatch Logs is a great service. It's great for PCI DSS, for example, and it's essentially a thing where you go and install an agent on an EC2 instance. It will then send monitoring data about that instance to CloudWatch Logs, and then you can go in and see that data. And so it's not things like CPU utilization, disk utilization, network utilization, etc. You can actually go in and monitor things like HTTP response codes in Apache logs. So you can go down and do specific application monitoring using this CloudWatch Logs. So this is really, really clever tool. Again, it's great for PCI DSS. You have to go in and create a log group. This is all outside the scope of the Solutions Architect Associate exam. We do cover this in the SysOps Administrator exam. So that's events and logs. The next thing we need to go in is and have a look at is alarms. So we go across to alarms and we go in and we're going to create an alarm. Now an alarm again can be based off any of the metrics that you've got pre-populated. What I would be interested in is an alarm for, let's say, CPU utilization. So I'll go ahead and hit create. I'll hit next. So I'll call this alarm thresholds, and it could be that CPU utilization is greater than 80%. And we can also use that as the description. And here we're going to say greater than or equal to 80%. And it says for one consecutive period. So you might be wondering, where do you set the periods? It's actually just down here. So period is 5 minutes. So I might just say 1 minute. So this will generate an alarm if my CPU utilization goes over 80% for 1 minute, and then it can take actions. So whenever this state is in alarm, send a notification, and I can go ahead and hit new list, and you can actually create an email list here. So I could just say my email at email.com. And then that will basically send an email to you saying that there's been an alarm threshold and that your EC2 instance has gone above 80%, and that's the action that it's taking. You can also do really sort of cool things like actual events themselves. So you could do an EC2 action here. So let's leave this alarm in here, but let's change this from greater than to less than or equal to, and we'll say 5%. And I won't bother updating the names or the descriptions. I'm just going to show you this as well. So whenever this alarm is in the state alarm, take this action. So we could go in and terminate this instance. So think about what that means. Essentially, what we're saying here is whenever your CPU utilization is less than or equal to 5% for 1 minute, it means we're no longer really using that EC2 instance. So what do we want to do? We can take an action and we can go in and terminate this instance. And we could, it's optional as to whether or not it notifies us. You can delete that. You could just go in and terminate the instance. So you could create these alarms for, EC2 instances that are in a load balance pool. Maybe 1 minute's a bit aggressive. You could say a day. So if it's been in this load balance pool and it's been less than or equal to 5% CPU utilization for an entire day, get rid of this instance. We don't need it at all. And we also cover how this works using auto-scaling groups, which will be in later on in the course. Okay, so what have we learned in this lab? Well, your standard monitoring is turned on by default, and it's always has a duration of every 5 minutes. So it's polling your EC2 instances every 5 minutes. Your detailed monitoring you have to subscribe to, and you do that when you're creating that EC2 instance. Detailed monitoring polls your EC2 instance every 1 minute. And then we actually looked at what we could do with CloudWatch. So we have dashboards, which is where you can create awesome dashboards to see what is happening with your AWS environment. You can go in and add your own widgets and configure those. We can create alarms, so this allows you to set alarms that notify you when a particular thresholds are hit, and you can also take actions in the event of an alarm being sound. Events, so we have CloudWatch events which allow you to respond to state changes in your AWS resources. So the example there was you provision new EC2 instances. You can then have a CloudWatch event trigger a Lambda function, which then goes in and updates your DNS. Again, this is quite outside the scope of this particular exam, but this does come up in the SysOps Administrator Associate exam. And then we've got logs. So CloudWatch logs is where you install an agent on your EC2 instances, and it helps you aggregate, monitor, and store logs. And these logs can actually go down to the application level. So you can get HTTP events or HTTP codes from Apache and send those to CloudWatch logs. I think it's also important not to confuse CloudWatch with CloudTrail. That's a common mistake made by students. So remember, CloudTrail is for auditing, and it basically audits every single thing you do on your AWS environment, whereas CloudWatch is all about performance monitoring. Okay, so that's it, guys. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, feel free to move on to the next lecture. Thank you.